Tonight we present
the experiment of precognitive dreams. On a quiet summer night in 1927, in a small village in England, an engineer named John William Dunn woke up startled. He had had a vivid dream in which a train derailed on the outskirts of London, causing a catastrophe. What was most unsettling was that Dunn had never visited that location, yet he could describe every detail with precision. The next day, the news confirmed the accident exactly as he had dreamed. This event marked the beginning of a series of experiences that would challenge the known laws of sensory perception. Extrasensory perception, ESP, has been a topic of fascination and controversy for centuries. Since ancient times, there have been documented cases of people claiming to have psychic abilities, such as telepathy, clairvoyance, and precognition. However, it wasn't until the 20th century that parapsychology began to systematically study these phenomena. J.W. Dunn, an aeronautical engineer, became one of the pioneers in this field with his book An Experiment with Time, where he documented his precognitive dreams and proposed theories on the nature of time and consciousness. Dunn wasn't the only one to experience precognitive dreams. In the 1930s, Dr. J.B. Rhine, a psychologist at Duke University, conducted a series of experiments to investigate ESP. Using Zener cards, Rhine attempted to quantify people's ability to perceive information beyond known senses. Although his results were controversial, they laid the foundation for future research in parapsychology. One of the most intriguing cases documented by Rhine was that of Sarah, a young woman who claimed to have dreams that predicted future events. In one of her dreams, Sarah saw a devastating fire at a local factory. She described in detail the structure of the building, the flames, and the chaos that followed. 2 weeks later, the factory suffered a fire exactly as she had described. The investigators were puzzled, unable to explain how Sarah could have known about a future event with such accuracy. As Dunn and other researchers delved deeper into the study of precognitive dreams, more questions arose than answers. How is it possible for someone to see the future in their dreams? Is precognition an innate ability, or can it be developed with practice? What implications does this have for our understanding of time and reality? Testimonies from people who had experienced precognitive dreams piled up, each one more baffling than the last. One man dreamed of an earthquake in Japan, accurately describing the magnitude and epicenter of the quake. A woman dreamed of the birth of her grandson, including details about the hospital and medical staff, months before her daughter even knew she was pregnant. The scientists studying these phenomena faced a dilemma. On one hand, the data was too numerous and consistent to be ignored. On the other hand, the lack of a plausible scientific explanation led many to remain skeptical. The scientific community was divided between those who believed in the possibility of ESP and those who considered it pseudoscience. The first part of our story culminates in an unexpected twist. During a parapsychology conference, a researcher presents a new discovery, a device that, according to him, can amplify a person's precognitive abilities. The device, called the Dream Amplifier, promises to revolutionize our understanding of extrasensory perception. However, its use raises ethical and scientific questions. Is it safe to manipulate the human mind in this way? What consequences could it have for those who use it? The audience is on edge, eager to uncover the truth behind the Dream Amplifier and the implications of precognitive dreams. The second part of our story promises to unravel these mysteries and lead to a shocking conclusion. The parapsychology conference had left all the attendees in a state of anticipation. The Dream Amplifier promised to be a revolution in the study of extrasensory perception, but it also raised serious ethical and scientific concerns. The device, developed by Dr. Richard Hargrove, a renowned parapsychology researcher, was designed to enhance individuals' precognitive abilities by stimulating certain areas of the brain during sleep. Dr. Hargrove explained that the device worked by emitting low-frequency electromagnetic pulses that synchronized the user's brainwaves with a specific pattern associated with precognition. According to his preliminary studies, subjects who used the Dream Amplifier experienced a significant increase in the frequency and accuracy of their precognitive dreams. Dr. Hargrove's announcement sparked an intense debate in the scientific community and among the general public. Some saw the device as a revolutionary tool that could open new frontiers in our understanding of time and consciousness. Others, however, expressed concerns about the potential side effects and ethical implications of manipulating the human mind in this way. Sarah, the young woman who had experienced precognitive dreams about the factory fire, was one of the first volunteers to try the dream amplifier. During the first few weeks of use, Sarah reported an increase in the clarity and detail of her dreams. In one of them, she saw a car accident on a nearby road, describing the location, the vehicles involved, and the weather conditions with precision. 2 days later, the accident occurred exactly as she had dreamed. As more people began to use the device, similar testimonies emerged. A man dreamed of a financial collapse in the stock market and took measures to protect his investments, saving himself from significant losses when the collapse came to pass. A woman dreamed of a terrorist attack in a European city and alerted authorities, who were able to prevent the attack thanks to the information she provided. However, not all results were positive. Some users of the dream amplifier began experiencing disturbing side effects. Recurrent nightmares, insomnia, and severe anxiety became common problems among the participants in the study. Additionally, some reported a sense of disconnection from reality, as if they were living in two worlds simultaneously, one of their dreams and one of wakefulness. The most alarming case was that of David, a young college student who had been a staunch advocate for the device. David began having increasingly dark and disturbing dreams, in which he saw catastrophic events that not only affected his immediate surroundings, but the world as a whole. In one of his dreams, he saw a nuclear war devastating several major cities. The intensity of these dreams began to affect his mental health, leading him into a state of paranoia and despair. Dr. Hargrove, concerned about these developments, decided to suspend the use of the dream amplifier and conduct a thorough investigation into its effects. During this investigation, he discovered something surprising. The brainwave patterns induced by the device not only enhanced precognition, but also altered the user's perception of time. Essentially, the subjects were not just seeing the future, they were experiencing fragments of it in real time. The revelation that the dream amplifier could alter time perception led to a series of additional experiments. Dr. Hargrove and his team began studying the brains of the users using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, to better understand how the device affected brain activity. They discovered that certain areas of the brain, particularly the temporal lobe and hippocampus, showed unusually high activity during the use of the device. These findings suggested that the dream amplifier was activating neural circuits associated with memory and temporal perception in a way that had never been observed before. This led to an audacious theory. Precognition might not be a psychic ability in the traditional sense, but rather an advanced form of temporal information processing that allowed individuals to access possible futures based on patterns and probabilities. To test this theory, Dr. Hargrove's team designed an experiment in which subjects used the device while presented with complex and dynamic scenarios in a virtual reality environment. The results were astonishing. The subjects could not only predict future events within the virtual environment with surprising accuracy, but they also showed an improved ability to make quick and effective decisions based on that information. However, prolonged use of the device still had negative side effects. Subjects reported extreme mental fatigue and an increasing difficulty in distinguishing between dreamed events and reality. This led the team to conclude that while the dream amplifier held incredible potential, its use needed to be carefully regulated and monitored to avoid harm to the mental health of the users. The story of the dream amplifier and the precognitive dreams of Sarah and other volunteers left an indelible mark on the field of parapsychology. While the device demonstrated that extrasensory perception could have a scientific basis, it also underscored the need to approach these phenomena with caution and responsibility. Dr. Hargrove presented his findings in a series of lectures and scientific publications, opening a new chapter in the study of temporal perception and consciousness. His work inspired other researchers to explore the boundaries between science and the paranormal, seeking answers to questions that had baffled humanity for centuries. As the scientific community continued to debate the implications of the dream amplifier, one thing became clear. The human mind is a vast and largely unexplored territory, full of mysteries that challenge our understanding of time, reality, and perception. Once considered mere curiosities, precognitive dreams were now seen as a window into a world of infinite possibilities. The story of Sarah, David, and Dr. Hargrove reminds us that while science can offer explanations and theories, there will always be an element of mystery in our quest for knowledge. Precognitive dreams and extrasensory perception invite us to question what we think we know and keep an open mind to the unknown. Ultimately, the dream amplifier did not only amplify the precognitive abilities of its users, it also amplified our curiosity and desire to explore the limits of the human mind. And although the device was withdrawn from the market due to its side effects, its legacy endures in the ongoing research and debate about the nature of perception and time.
Tonight we present
the telepathy experiment in space, the Apollo 14 case. On February 5, 1971, during the Apollo 14 mission, a strange and inexplicable event occurred aboard the spacecraft. Edgar Mitchell, a NASA astronaut, while orbiting the moon, began to experience a sensation that would challenge the known laws of science and human perception. More than 400,000 kilometers from Earth, Mitchell felt an inexplicable mental connection with his colleague on Earth, Dr. Joseph B. Benowitz. However, the most astonishing aspect was that it was not just a vague intuition. It was a clear, distinct message with no ambiguities, one that arrived in an instant of absolute calm and made the mission take an unexpected turn. Mitchell didn't just experience telepathy in its purest form. He began questioning the boundaries between what is real and what is possible. His discovery would not only change the course of his life, but would also reveal a mysterious connection between the human mind and the universe, challenging the understanding of paranormal phenomena. Parapsychology, a scientific discipline that studies phenomena such as telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and out-of-body experiences, has always been surrounded by controversy. Since the early 20th century, with the first experiments by Joseph B. Rhine at Duke University, cases have been documented that defy known laws of physics and biology. Telepathy studies, for example, try to prove whether the human mind can communicate in some way without the mediation of traditional senses. Over the years, telepathy has been a topic of debate among scientists. While some defend its existence, others consider it a mere coincidence or even a fraud. However, Edgar Mitchell's case is one that continues to capture attention because it occurred under extraordinary circumstances and in a highly controlled observational context, outer space. Mitchell's story is deeply intertwined with the history of NASA and the Apollo program. Although his mission was scientific, the isolation and exposure to extreme conditions in space opened new doors to experiment with phenomena of extrasensory perception. In the case of telepathy, the key question Mitchell asked was, is it possible that the boundaries of space also open the doors of the human mind to new forms of communication? In the context of the Apollo 14 mission, Mitchell and his colleague, Commander Alan Shepard, were aboard the lunar module. During the long hours when the spacecraft orbited the moon, Mitchell began to experience an indescribable sensation. While Shepard focused on scheduled tasks, Mitchell went into a deep meditative state, something he had practiced throughout his career. It was in one of those moments of calm when, according to Mitchell, he received a clear mental message from his colleague Benowitz on Earth. This message was not merely a mental whisper. It contained precise details about the situation on Earth, information regarding scientific research, and, most unsettling of all, a sense of urgency that seemed to transcend distances and barriers of space. When Mitchell reported the phenomenon, his fellow crew members, including the flight controllers in Houston, couldn't understand how or why he had experienced this type of connection. Mitchell, for his part, was unwilling to dismiss it as a simple perceptual error, as some experts suggested. There was something in his experience that felt absolutely real, and his belief in the existence of telepathy began to strengthen. The event was documented in the official mission reports, though with notable caution. The mission control records did not directly mention telepathy, but did include notes about Mitchell's change in behavior and his statements about receiving unusual information. However, the documents were carefully worded, leaving an ambiguous interpretation of what had occurred. What was most striking about this event was that, before his spaceflight, Mitchell had studied the works of Rhine and other parapsychology researchers. He had first-hand knowledge of the experiments attempting to verify the existence of telepathy. However, he never imagined that he himself would become the center of a phenomenon that seemed to defy all laws of conventional science. As the mission progressed and Mitchell shared his experience with mission control and some of his fellow scientists, difficult questions began to arise. Was it possible that the extreme conditions of space influenced the astronauts' perception? Or was there something else, a form of perception that escapes our conventional understanding? Although many tried to downplay the incident, the feeling that something extraordinary had happened did not fade. Witnesses from NASA who were present during the communications with the astronaut, such as the flight controllers, began to notice that Mitchell seemed more introspective than usual. His behavior began to change. At times, he appeared to be completely unaware of his physical surroundings, as if he were immersed in an alternate reality. Some reports indicated that Mitchell did not respond quickly to mission control's instructions, which was highly unusual for such a trained astronaut. The question that arose among the scientists and the crew members was, what type of phenomenon had caused this experience? The reports of telepathy in the context of the Apollo 14 mission were vague, and some experts were skeptical. However, Mitchell was not willing to let it go. In his private conversations, he mentioned that he felt he had touched a dimension of the human mind that was, until that moment, unknown. Researchers began to review other incidents that had been reported in the past, looking for similar patterns. Throughout history, there have been documented experiences of people claiming to have felt mental connections with others, whether through dreams, visions, or even altered states of consciousness. But Mitchell's case seemed unique, as it occurred in outer space, in an isolated and highly controlled context. As Apollo 14's mission came to an end, the unease surrounding the incident continued to grow. Although the initial results were inconclusive, the telepathy phenomenon that Mitchell experienced was not easily dismissed. Without a clear scientific explanation, the mystery continued to fuel speculation and theories. The connection that Edgar Mitchell claimed to have experienced with Earth through telepathy left an unsolved riddle that would remain a topic of debate in the years to come. Upon returning to Earth, Mitchell's statements about his experience were not entirely understood by NASA, who remained cautious in their comments. However, many of his colleagues and parapsychology experts began to take his words seriously. And so, while humanity refocused on space exploration and the scientific trials of the Apollo mission, the question of whether telepathy truly exists or whether it is a human illusion remained unresolved, leaving a mystery that still resonates today. Upon his return to Earth, Edgar Mitchell found himself in an uncomfortable situation. His experience with telepathy in space was documented in NASA's official reports, but without providing further details about its exact nature. While some in the scientific community offered explanations ranging from suggestion to simple perceptual error, Mitchell could not shake the feeling that what he had experienced was real, a genuine connection beyond conventional physics. Several months passed before Mitchell dared to share his story with the world in a public forum. The opportunity came when he was invited to participate in an international conference on parapsychology organized by Princeton University in 1972. During his speech, Mitchell surprised the audience by recounting his experience in detail, explaining that while in space, he had felt his mind liberating from physical limitations, allowing him to experience a type of communication that didn't rely on traditional senses. Mitchell's testimony, coming from a NASA astronaut with an impeccable reputation, changed the landscape of parapsychology research. Although many still regarded it as an isolated case, the possibility that telepathy could occur under such extreme conditions drew the attention of both the scientific community and paranormal researchers. However, Mitchell was not interested in proving anything to conventional science. For him, the experience was clear enough to change his worldview. In the years that followed, the story of Mitchell's telepathy became a subject of debate. Some scientists considered it to be a mere case of suggestion influenced by the stress and isolation of space. Others, however, believed the case pointed to something much deeper: the possibility that the human mind has unknown capacities that go beyond what has traditionally been studied. The controversy reached its peak when, in 1976, a team of parapsychology researchers led by Dr. John B. Alexander initiated a research project funded by NASA to study psychic phenomena in astronauts. The experiment included the evaluation of potential psychic abilities among astronauts, as well as the analysis of reports from those who had experienced strange phenomena in space, such as Mitchell's case. As more testimonies and data were gathered, Dr. Alexander uncovered surprising patterns. Several astronauts, though not as public as Mitchell, had reported similar experiences, albeit less direct. Some spoke of feelings of mental connection with loved ones on Earth, while others reported sensing thoughts and emotions from their fellow crew members without the need for words. Although these testimonies lacked the scientific evidence needed to confirm telepathy, the coincidences were intriguing enough to warrant further investigation. Meanwhile, Mitchell, who had previously been a firm advocate for conventional science, began to adopt a more open stance toward studies of consciousness and parapsychology. In fact, in 1973, he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, INS, in California, with the aim of exploring the frontiers of the human mind and studying phenomena such as telepathy, precognition, and out-of-body experiences. His work focused on investigating the unknown capacities of consciousness, using his own experience as a starting point. In 1986, an unexpected twist in the research on telepathy in space occurred when a team of scientists from the United States government leaked classified information related to telepathy experiments conducted by the CIA. A declassified report revealed that the military had been investigating paranormal phenomena such as telepathy and remote viewing during the Cold War, in a project known as Stargate. Although the Stargate project had been discontinued in the 1990s, the revelations fueled speculation that the government had been involved in far deeper parapsychological research than had previously been known. In this context, new data emerged regarding the Apollo 14 mission. A subsequent analysis of the mission's communication records revealed a pattern that had not been noticed at the time. The radio signals between the spacecraft and mission control in Houston showed anomalies during the key moments when Mitchell reported his telepathic experience. An expert in space communications suggested that the radio transmissions had been distorted in an unusual manner at these specific moments, raising the question of whether there had been any psychic interference or even some kind of channeling of mental signals. The report on these anomalies was not fully disclosed, but some researchers began to link it to the theory that the human mind might interact with advanced technologies in ways that we do not yet fully understand. The final resolution of this mystery did not come quickly, but Mitchell's research on telepathy took on a new perspective. While NASA never officially confirmed that what had happened with Edgar Mitchell was a clear case of telepathy, further investigations by the scientific community and the growing interest in the phenomenon of expanded consciousness continued to increase. Mitchell, in the later stages of his life, reflected on his experience with telepathy in space during interviews in his final years. He stated that he never believed his case to be an isolated phenomenon. Instead, he believed that telepathy could be a latent human ability, something that all humans could develop under special conditions, such as those found in outer space, where the mind is liberated from the physical limitations of the body. Although he could never scientifically prove his experience, Edgar Mitchell left a lasting legacy in modern parapsychology. His work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences remains one of the main sources of research in the field of consciousness and extrasensory perceptions. Ultimately, the case of telepathy in the Apollo 14 mission was not fully resolved, but it opened new doors for the exploration of the human mind and its still unknown potential. Today, Edgar Mitchell's case remains one of the most fascinating in the history of parapsychology and space exploration. Was his experience a product of his mind in an extreme state of isolation? Or was there something more, something that transcends the understanding of current science? The phenomenon remains a mystery, and the debate on telepathy and other paranormal phenomena continues. However, one of Mitchell's most important legacies is the fundamental question he left open. How far can we truly go in understanding the human mind? As science continues to search for answers, the mystery persists, suggesting that there is more to be discovered, beyond the boundaries of perception and reason, waiting to be uncovered.
The Noctillion. Tonight we present
Pam Reynolds' near-death experience. Pam Reynolds' experience is one of the most compelling cases in the field of near-death experiences, NDEs, and one that challenges what we think we know about consciousness, life, and death. The case itself raises unsettling questions about the true nature of human awareness, particularly when it seems to exist independently of the brain. In 1991, Pam Reynolds, a 35-year-old woman, underwent a complex and high-risk brain surgery for a life-threatening condition known as an aneurysm. However, it wasn't the surgery itself that would make her case legendary. It was the extraordinary experience that occurred while her brain was allegedly shut down. Reynolds surgeons were performing what is called hypothermic cardiac arrest, a procedure that involves cooling the body to reduce the brain's metabolic demands, essentially halting all electrical activity in the brain for a short period. Under these conditions, the patient's brain should have been completely inactive, incapable of producing any form of conscious thought or sensory perception. But it was during this time, when there should have been no brain activity, that Reynolds reported vivid details of her surroundings, some of which were medically impossible for her to perceive. The phenomena of near-death experiences, NDEs, have been a subject of interest for centuries, but only in the past few decades has modern science begun to take a serious look at them. These experiences, often described as journeys through tunnels, encounters with bright lights, or visits to an afterlife, have puzzled researchers and laypeople alike. One of the central questions in NDE studies is whether these phenomena are products of brain activity, a result of oxygen deprivation, or evidence of consciousness existing outside of the physical brain. Numerous studies and anecdotal reports have suggested that NDEs are not just hallucinations caused by a dying brain. In fact, researchers such as Dr. Raymond Moody and Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross have argued that NDEs may be evidence of some form of existence beyond the physical body. However, the mainstream scientific community often dismisses these reports as the result of neurological or psychological reactions to the trauma of dying. In 1975, Dr. Raymond Moody's groundbreaking book Life After Life helped to bring attention to these phenomena, reporting cases of individuals who had experienced what they believed to be out-of-body experiences, with some even describing accurate details of events that occurred during their clinical death. These accounts laid the foundation for much of the modern interest in near-death experiences. Pam Reynolds' case, however, took the debate to a whole new level. Here was a woman who, under the most controlled and scientifically verifiable conditions, was supposedly experiencing an awareness that went beyond the expected limits of human perception. Pam Reynolds' story was meticulously documented by her medical team. In May of 1991, she underwent a procedure at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. The surgery required that her brain be completely inactive during the procedure. To achieve this, her body was cooled to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 16 degrees Celsius, and her heart was temporarily stopped. For all intents and purposes, Reynolds should have been completely unconscious, with no capacity for thought, sensation, or perception. It was during this period, however, that Reynolds had a remarkable out-of-body experience. She reported floating above her own body and witnessing the entire surgical procedure. She described the tools being used by the surgeons, the conversations they had, and even the specific details of the room, all of which she should not have been able to perceive. One of the most compelling parts of her experience was the fact that, while dead in terms of her brain function, Reynolds described a very specific detail about the environment that she should not have had access to. a small metallic object on a shelf in the operating room. She even described the sounds of the surgical instruments being used. Later, when she was asked about these details, the medical team confirmed that her descriptions were eerily accurate, even though they were not visible from her position on the operating table. She had no way of knowing these things unless she had experienced some form of consciousness independent of her body. Despite this, skeptics argued that these memories were the result of the brain's residual electrical activity. However, Reynolds' case stood out because she had been subjected to extreme medical conditions that should have rendered her mind inactive, yet she experienced vivid, accurate perceptions while being clinically dead. As the days following the surgery unfolded, Reynolds' experience continued to baffle those around her. Her ability to describe details of the room, the medical equipment, and the actions of the surgeons during her procedure left many investigators perplexed. She had not been exposed to any of these details prior to the surgery, and the account she provided was far too specific to be explained away as a mere coincidence or post-surgery reconstruction. In interviews, Reynolds explained that while floating above her body, she had an acute sense of awareness and a heightened perception of everything happening in the operating room. She described the surgical tools with precision, identifying them even though they were out of her visual range. Most strikingly, she reported hearing the surgeon's conversation, including one specific moment when one of the doctors joked about her body temperature. The medical team that attended her surgery, as well as a group of paranormal researchers who later investigated her case, were divided on how to interpret these findings. Was this evidence of the existence of consciousness beyond the brain? Or could it be a result of a neurological phenomenon that had not yet been understood by science? Some researchers suggested that these experiences were the result of neural firing that occurred during the process of brain death. Others, particularly those in the field of parapsychology, believed that Reynolds' experience was evidence of an afterlife or a consciousness that could transcend the physical body. As Pam Reynolds recovered from her surgery, the mystery surrounding her case only deepened. While many tried to rationalize her experiences, the facts remained. She had accurately described an environment she could not have known about while clinically dead. This created a paradox that no one, at the time, could fully explain. As she shared her story with the world, more questions arose than answers. How could her mind have remained aware during the most critical moments of brain inactivity? What did her case mean for our understanding of consciousness? And was it possible that the mind existed independently of the brain? These questions remained unanswered, and the medical and scientific community remained divided. The case had only just begun, and it left the world questioning what is possible beyond the limits of human perception. The story of Pam Reynolds' near-death experience continued to unfold in the years following her surgery. While she recovered physically, the impact of her experience lingered deeply in her mind. As her story gained attention, a growing group of researchers and investigators, from doctors to parapsychologists, took a keen interest in her case, eager to unravel the mystery that had so effectively challenged the understanding of human consciousness. Reynolds herself, though deeply affected by the experience, became an unexpected spokeswoman for the debate on near-death experiences. She continued to speak about the vividness of her out-of-body experience, the awareness she felt while clinically dead, and the profound changes it had brought to her life. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the scientific explanations for her experience, Pam Reynolds was resolute in her belief that what she had encountered was something far beyond the physical limits of the brain. Several years after the event, new discoveries were made that further intensified the mystery. A team of neurologists, working independently, conducted a study based on Reynolds' medical records and the detailed descriptions she had provided. They examined the procedures, the status of her brain during the surgery, and the exact timing of her supposed out-of-body experience. The results were perplexing. According to the neurological data, Reynolds' brain activity had been completely flat during the period she described her vivid, conscious experiences. The research team struggled to explain how her mind could remain so active while her brain showed no signs of electrical activity. This evidence only deepened the enigma. Had Pam Reynolds truly experienced some form of consciousness that transcended the physical state of her brain? Or was there another, more complicated explanation that had yet to be uncovered? Pam Reynolds' case soon became a cornerstone for the broader conversation about consciousness. Researchers around the world began to explore the idea that human awareness might not be entirely confined to the brain. Could it be that the mind or consciousness is something separate from the physical body? Was it possible that, during certain conditions, the mind could exist independently of the body? The implications of these questions were profound, reaching beyond the realms of science into philosophy and even spirituality. What does it mean for our understanding of life and death if consciousness can exist outside the physical body? Is there a life after death? Or is there a realm of existence where the mind exists beyond the biological constraints of the body? Pam Reynolds' case raised more questions than it answered, but it also prompted further investigations and discoveries into the nature of consciousness. Some researchers in the field of parapsychology suggested that her experience was proof of an afterlife, while others leaned toward the idea of a deeper, unrecognized aspect of human consciousness, a field that, at the time, remained largely unexplored by conventional science. But it wasn't just the scientific community that found her story intriguing. Pam Reynolds' experience resonated deeply with the public. Her story sparked an ongoing debate over whether death truly marked the end of consciousness, or if there was something beyond the physical world, something that could be accessed even when the brain had ceased functioning. In one of the most intriguing follow-up interviews, Pam described a new detail about her experience that had never been shared before. She recounted an encounter with what she called the voice. During her near-death experience, she claimed to have been greeted by a presence that was neither human nor physical. The voice, she said, told her that she was not meant to cross over yet, and that she had more to do in this life. It wasn't just a spiritual encounter, it was something that transcended the notion of human interaction. This chilling detail added another layer to her experience, suggesting that consciousness might operate on levels far beyond what we can comprehend. Just as the scientific community was beginning to wrap its head around the implications of Reynolds' experience, a twist occurred that brought a new dimension to the story. While Pam's personal narrative remained consistent, new revelations about the medical records surrounding her case began to surface. A former member of the surgical team, who had not been publicly involved in the case before, came forward with a startling claim. This individual, a nurse who had been present during Reynolds' surgery, provided a detailed account of a critical moment in the procedure that had not been shared with the public. According to the nurse, Reynolds' heart had not, in fact, stopped as the medical team had originally believed. Instead, the heart rate had fluctuated in ways that suggested a low level of cerebral activity. This new piece of information raised eyebrows. Could it be that Reynolds' experience could be explained by brain activity that had not been detected at the time? Perhaps the so-called clinical death was not as absolute as originally thought. Some researchers, particularly those skeptical of near-death experiences, seized upon this revelation, suggesting that Reynolds' mind had not truly been dead during the critical period. Despite this new claim, many in the scientific and parapsychological communities found it difficult to reconcile the new information with Reynolds' vivid and accurate memories of the surgical procedure. If her brain had been functioning at some level, why had she experienced such precise and vivid perceptions while under anesthesia? The question remained unresolved, further fueling the debate. As time passed, Pam Reynolds continued to live her life, a changed woman with a profound understanding of life and death. Although the mystery surrounding her near-death experience never reached a definitive conclusion, her story had an undeniable impact. It had sparked a global conversation about consciousness, death, and the possibilities that lay beyond the physical realm. The scientific community, while divided, had to acknowledge that there were still many unknowns when it came to human consciousness. Could consciousness truly exist beyond the body? Was Pam Reynolds' experience proof of a life after death, or was it simply a result of some unrecognized neurological phenomenon? The answers, for now, remained elusive, but the search for them continued. Pam Reynolds' experience may never be fully explained, but it changed the way we view consciousness, the brain, and the mysteries of life and death. It suggested that the boundaries of what we understand about the mind and its capabilities might be far more fluid and complex than we ever imagined. In closing, the case of Pam Reynolds represents more than just a peculiar medical anomaly. It challenges our perception of reality, of consciousness, and of the very nature of existence. Her story is a stark reminder that science, while a powerful tool for understanding the world, is still in its infancy when it comes to the mind's deepest mysteries. Perhaps Pam's experience is a window into something much greater, a part of the universe that we are only beginning to explore. As we continue to seek answers about life, death, and the nature of consciousness, one thing remains certain. The phenomenon that Pam Reynolds experienced was not easily dismissed. Whether it is proof of an afterlife, evidence of consciousness existing outside the brain, or something entirely different, it is a mystery that continues to captivate our imagination, sparking further inquiry into the unknown. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, the fact that some questions, no matter how much we strive to answer them, may never fully be understood.
The Noctillion. Tonight we present
The Hat Man, Visions of Sleep Paralysis. The mystery surrounding the Hat Man figure in sleep paralysis experiences has fascinated and bewildered researchers and experiencers alike for decades. Millions of individuals around the world have reported encountering this shadowy figure during episodes of sleep paralysis. Whether it is a collective hallucination or a paranormal phenomenon is still up for debate, but the consistency of the descriptions and the unsettling nature of these encounters have left a trail of unanswered questions. The Hat Man is often described as a tall, shadowy figure, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, with an air of cold indifference toward the individuals who experience him. These encounters typically occur during episodes of sleep paralysis, where the sleeper finds themselves awake but unable to move or speak, trapped in a state between sleep and wakefulness. While many assume that these experiences are simply the result of the mind being trapped in a temporary state of paralysis, a growing body of evidence suggests that there may be more to these encounters than meets the eye. Throughout history, reports of shadowy figures appearing during sleep paralysis have been documented in various cultures around the world. However, it wasn't until the 20th century, with the rise of scientific investigation into sleep disorders and the exploration of paranormal phenomena, that the figure of the Hat Man began to gain widespread attention. What makes this phenomenon so striking is not just the consistent descriptions from different individuals, but the eerie and unsettling presence that these figures seem to embody. Many experiencers report feeling an overwhelming sense of fear or dread when encountering the Hat Man, as though they are being watched by an entity that exists beyond the physical world. Sleep paralysis, the condition that often accompanies these encounters with shadowy figures, has long been studied by sleep scientists and psychologists. Traditionally, sleep paralysis was explained as a natural phenomenon that occurs during the transition between sleep stages, particularly during rapid eye movement, REM sleep. During this time, the body is effectively paralyzed to prevent us from acting out our dreams. However, some individuals report that they experience vivid hallucinations, including the sensation of a dark, menacing presence, while others, like those who encounter the Hat Man, describe seeing an actual figure during these episodes. In the late 20th century, researchers began to look more closely at the connections between sleep paralysis and paranormal experiences. In 1991, Dr. Susan Hartley, a leading parapsychologist, began investigating cases of individuals reporting the Hat Man figure. She found that many of these individuals, while under the influence of sleep paralysis, described the figure as something more than a mere product of their minds. The consistency of the descriptions across cultures and backgrounds led Dr. Hartley and others to question whether this was truly just a hallucination or whether there was something else at play. While mainstream science largely attributed these experiences to neurological or psychological phenomena, The growing number of testimonies left an increasing number of researchers exploring the possibility of a deeper, more mysterious explanation. Could the Hat Man be a manifestation of a collective unconscious, a shared experience among those who encounter this figure during sleep paralysis? Or, as some have suggested, could the Hat Man be something more sinister, an entity that exists in a realm beyond our own? One of the most well-known and thoroughly documented cases of a Hat Man encounter occurred in 2010, when a young woman named Sarah Simmons shared her experience during a parapsychology conference. Sarah had been suffering from recurrent episodes of sleep paralysis since her teenage years, and during these episodes, she would frequently experience the sensation of being watched by an ominous presence. In one particularly vivid encounter, she described seeing the Hat Man standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with piercing, unseen eyes. What made Sarah's case particularly intriguing was the clarity of her descriptions. She reported that the Hat Man was not just a shadow, but a distinct figure, dressed in a dark suit and wide-brimmed hat. She described a sense of dread and coldness emanating from him, and she vividly recalled how, during her paralysis, the figure seemed to communicate with her, though not in any conventional way. Instead of speaking, the Hat Man's presence seemed to communicate a silent, oppressive force, one that made Sarah feel as if she was in the presence of something ancient and malevolent. Sarah's encounter was not an isolated incident. Over the course of the next few years, more people began coming forward with similar reports, all describing the Hat Man in strikingly similar terms. Researchers began collecting testimonies and comparing them to other documented cases of sleep paralysis, uncovering a disturbing pattern of consistent descriptions. In some instances, people reported feeling that the Hat Man was not just an observer, but an active participant in their paralysis, as if he had the ability to control or manipulate their thoughts and actions. The more Sarah's case was investigated, the more mysterious the situation became. Experts in sleep paralysis, psychology, and parapsychology began to question whether the Hat Man was simply a psychological manifestation, or if there could be a paranormal explanation for the phenomenon. Were these encounters a collective hallucination, a product of the mind's response to the fear and terror of sleep paralysis? Or could the Hat Man be an entity that exists in a parallel realm, interacting with those who are in a vulnerable state of consciousness? The investigation into the Hat Man phenomenon began to grow in complexity as researchers explored a wide range of theories. One of the central questions that emerged was whether the Hat Man could be an entity that existed outside of the individual's mind, a manifestation of a larger, shared psychic experience. Some parapsychologists suggested that the Hat Man might represent a collective unconscious, a shared symbol that appeared during sleep paralysis episodes, while others speculated that the figure could be a type of interdimensional being capable of interacting with human consciousness from a different plane of existence. A particularly disturbing development occurred when one of the investigators, Dr. Jeremy Collins, an expert in sleep disorders, experienced a personal encounter with the Hat Man. Dr. Collins had long been skeptical of paranormal explanations for sleep paralysis, but his own experience during a sleep study changed his perspective. He described waking up during an episode of paralysis and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. As he tried to move, he saw the figure of the Hat Man standing at the foot of his bed. The Hat Man was silent, but his presence filled Dr. Collins with an intense feeling of coldness and fear. For the first time, Dr. Collins felt that he was experiencing something that could not be explained by science alone. This event deepened the mystery, and the investigators were now faced with an undeniable question. If someone as grounded in science as Dr. Collins could experience the Hat Man firsthand, what did that mean for our understanding of sleep paralysis? Was it possible that the Hat Man was not just a product of the brain's response to sleep paralysis, but a genuine paranormal phenomenon? As the investigation continued, more questions emerged than answers. The growing number of testimonies, including Dr. Collins' own experience, suggested that the Hat Man was not just a figment of imagination, but a genuine, shared phenomenon. Some researchers began to entertain the possibility that the figure was a manifestation of a collective unconscious, while others speculated that the Hat Man was an entity that existed in a realm beyond human comprehension. With each new encounter and each new testimony, the mystery of the Hat Man only deepened. Was he simply a terrifying hallucination, a manifestation of fear during sleep paralysis? Or was he something more, a figure who crossed the boundaries between the known and the unknown, existing in a place beyond our understanding? As the investigation reached a standstill, one thing became clear. The phenomenon of the Hat Man was far from being fully understood. The answers that researchers were seeking remained elusive, and the mystery surrounding the figure only grew more perplexing. What lay ahead for those who sought to uncover the truth about the Hat Man? The only certainty was that this case had only just begun. The investigation into the Hat Man phenomenon had reached a critical point. After Dr. Collins' personal experience with the figure, many researchers began to rethink their initial theories. Could there be a connection between the Hat Man and the collective unconscious? Or was he a supernatural entity, transcending the boundaries of our understanding of reality? As more testimonies and cases were gathered, a chilling pattern began to emerge, suggesting that the Hat Man was no mere hallucination. The breakthrough came when a group of researchers, led by Dr. Collins, decided to delve deeper into the idea that the Hat Man might be a manifestation of a higher level of consciousness, a being that existed in a parallel dimension, crossing over into our reality during sleep paralysis episodes. They began to explore the connection between these experiences and individuals who reported heightened psychic abilities or encounters with other paranormal phenomena. One of the more startling testimonies came from Claire Hughes, a woman who had been experiencing sleep paralysis episodes for years. Claire had always been sensitive to certain energies, which she believed were linked to her heightened sense of intuition. During one of her episodes, she described the Hat Man not just as a menacing figure, but as a being with a presence that seemed to communicate with her through emotions rather than words. Claire reported feeling an intense sense of sadness emanating from the figure, which led her to believe that the Hat Man might be a manifestation of unresolved emotions or trauma. The more cases that were studied, the more it became clear that the Hat Man wasn't just a fear-inducing figure. He seemed to represent something more profound, an entity with its own emotional energy, and one that could interact with the subconscious mind on a deep, personal level. As researchers delved into the psychology of those who encountered the figure, they discovered a disturbing connection. Many of the experiencers had suffered from trauma, loss, or periods of extreme stress in their lives. It seemed that the Hat Man was more likely to appear to those who were emotionally vulnerable or in a state of mental distress. The discovery that the Hat Man might be connected to emotional trauma opened up a new avenue of investigation. Researchers began to theorize that this figure was not simply a being from another dimension, but a psychic imprint, an entity that was tied to the emotional energies of those it visited. The idea of an energy being capable of crossing into the physical world during a vulnerable state of consciousness was both compelling and terrifying. Could the Hat Man be a sentient being, feeding off the emotional energy of the experiencer? Or was he a kind of psychic echo, an imprint left behind by unresolved emotional trauma? Dr. Collins and his team continued to collect data from individuals who had experienced the Hat Man. One particularly striking case involved a man named Robert Owens, who had suffered from deep depression and anxiety after the sudden death of his wife. Robert reported seeing the Hat Man during his sleep paralysis episodes and described the figure as a shadow of sadness that seemed to reflect his own emotional state. It was as though the Hat Man had appeared as a mirror to Robert's inner turmoil, magnifying his pain and fear in a way that felt almost deliberate. In another case, a woman named Eva Martinez described her encounter with the Hat Man during a particularly difficult time in her life. Eva had recently lost her job and was going through a personal crisis. During her sleep paralysis episode, she saw the Hat Man standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. However, instead of feeling the usual fear, Eva reported that she felt an overwhelming sense of sympathy emanating from the figure. She said it was as if the Hat Man understood her pain, and for a brief moment, she felt a sense of connection with him, as though he was offering some kind of comfort. These encounters raised more questions than answers. If the Hat Man was indeed tied to the emotional state of the individual, Could he be an external manifestation of the subconscious mind? Or was there something more at play? Some deeper force that operated beyond the confines of the mind, interacting with the consciousness of those it encountered? The investigation took an unexpected turn when Dr. Collins uncovered an ancient text that mentioned a figure very similar to the Hat Man. The text, dated back to the early 18th century, described a shadow figure that appeared during moments of extreme emotional distress, particularly during times of death or grief. The figure was described as a tall, dark figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat, standing at the edge of the bed and observing those who were vulnerable. This discovery shocked the research team. The Hat Man, or something resembling him, had been documented for centuries. Was it possible that this figure was not just a modern phenomenon, but a timeless entity that had been crossing the boundaries of human consciousness for hundreds of years? The connection between the Hat Man and periods of trauma and loss seemed to echo the descriptions in the ancient text. Could it be that this figure was somehow tied to the human experience of grief and suffering, appearing during moments of vulnerability to feed off the emotional energy of those who encountered him? Dr. Collins and his team were left with a troubling realization. The Hat Man might not be just a temporary hallucination or a product of sleep paralysis. He could be a manifestation of something much larger, an ancient, timeless force that had been interacting with human consciousness for centuries. As the team continued their research, they discovered a pattern that tied together the stories of those who had encountered the Hat Man. While the figure was often terrifying, many experiencers reported that their encounters had profound psychological effects. Some described feeling a sense of closure after their encounter, as though they had confronted their deepest fears or emotional wounds. Others reported a sense of peace, as though the Hat Man had offered them some kind of release from their inner turmoil. In the end, the Hat Man phenomenon remained an enigma. Was he a psychic imprint, a being that existed to feed off emotional energy? Or was he something more, a timeless force that existed beyond our understanding of reality? As the investigation came to a close, Dr. Collins and his team could not provide a definitive answer. What they had uncovered, however, was a deeper understanding of the human psyche and the powerful connection between our emotions and the entities that might cross our paths during moments of vulnerability. The case of the Hat Man left more questions than answers. While some researchers speculated that the figure was a manifestation of the collective unconscious, others believed that he was an interdimensional being with his own mysterious agenda. The fact that the Hat Man had been encountered by individuals from all walks of life, across different cultures and time periods, suggested that his existence transcended the boundaries of individual experience. The mystery of the Hat Man was far from being solved, but one thing was clear. There was more to this phenomenon than meets the eye. Could the Hat Man be an entity that exists in a realm beyond our understanding? A figure that interacts with us during moments of vulnerability and emotional distress? Or was he simply a psychological manifestation, a product of our deepest fears and emotions? The truth remains elusive, but the phenomenon of the Hat Man continues to haunt the minds of those who encounter him, leaving behind an unanswered question. What is he, and why does he appear at the most vulnerable moments of our lives?
The Noctillion. Tonight we present
The Mysterious Philip Experiment. In 1972, a group of researchers from Toronto, Canada, set out to explore the boundaries between the human mind and the supernatural. They embarked on an experiment that, at first glance, seemed more like an intellectual exercise than a pursuit of the paranormal. The group, led by a parapsychologist, attempted to create an entity, an imaginary being, by using the method of seances and collective suggestion. What began as an academic investigation into the limits of the human imagination, however, quickly spiraled into something far beyond their control. Philip, as the entity was named, was born in their collective consciousness during one of their seances. But as the weeks passed, the group began experiencing phenomena that seemed to suggest the presence of Philip was more than mere imagination. The inexplicable began to occur. Objects would move, mysterious knocks would echo, and the group received responses during their sessions that were chillingly accurate. Could they have accidentally summoned something beyond their understanding? Could their collective belief in Philip have brought him to life in some way? The lines between science and the supernatural began to blur, and the group was left grappling with the consequences of their experiment. The story of the Philip experiment is one of the most well-known cases in the history of paranormal research, and it raises a number of critical questions about the nature of consciousness, belief, and the power of suggestion. The experiment was an attempt to explore the possibility of creating an entity purely through the collective minds of individuals. The group used the method of group suggestion during their seances, and they named their imaginary entity Philip. They created a backstory for Philip, inventing details about his life, personality, and even his tragic death. The idea was to see if, by focusing their collective thoughts and energy on Philip, they could create a form of psychic interaction with this fictional entity. Historically, parapsychology has often been at the fringes of scientific inquiry, with many researchers skeptical of the claims made by those investigating the paranormal. The debate about the existence of psychic phenomena, including telepathy, precognition, and the ability to communicate with spirits, has raged for decades. In the early 20th century, researchers like J.B. Rhine at Duke University sought to study ESP, extrasensory perception, and psychokinesis in a controlled laboratory setting. Despite these efforts, skepticism persisted in the scientific community, and many dismissed parapsychological phenomena as pseudoscience or the result of suggestibility and imagination. The Philip experiment, however, pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. Could a fictional entity, created purely by suggestion, manifest in the physical world? And if it did, what did that mean for our understanding of the mind and consciousness? The experiment was held at the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, TSBR, where a small group of researchers and volunteers began the process of creating Philip. The group consisted of several individuals with varying levels of belief in the supernatural, but all were committed to the process of the experiment. The participants sat in a circle during each seance and focused their collective attention on the idea of Philip, using the story they had crafted to guide their thoughts and interactions. The early sessions were unremarkable, with little more than the expected ritualistic proceedings of a typical seance. However, after a few weeks, something strange began to happen. During one of the sessions, the group began to notice subtle physical manifestations. A table that had been placed in the center of the room began to move, seemingly of its own accord. At first, the group assumed it was a result of the natural vibrations in the room or an accidental shift in their own movements. But as the phenomena continued, the manifestations became more pronounced. Knocks and taps began to echo through the room, answering specific questions posed to Philip. The group was astonished, as the responses seemed to be coming from an unseen force that was able to interact with them in a seemingly intelligent manner. Despite the growing evidence that something unusual was occurring, the researchers remained hesitant to draw conclusions. Could these phenomena be a result of the group's collective imagination, or was something else at play? As they pushed forward with their investigation, they attempted to document the occurrences scientifically, recording each detail and trying to rule out any possible natural explanation. As the weeks passed, the phenomena became more intense. The group began to receive answers from Philip that were eerily accurate. When asked about details that were unknown to the participants, the entity would respond in ways that suggested it had access to information beyond what the group had collectively invented. One of the most compelling moments occurred when the group began asking Philip questions about his past, including specific details about his life and death. Remarkably, Philip's responses were consistent and coherent, aligning with the backstory the group had created for him. The most astonishing part of the experiment was that the physical manifestations, such as knocking sounds and table movements, appeared to be linked directly to the questions being asked. When the group asked a specific question, the knocking would respond in a pattern that seemed to indicate a yes or no answer. This left the researchers with a profound dilemma. Were they witnessing a genuine paranormal phenomenon, or were these events the result of psychological suggestion and the power of the human mind to influence reality? Some of the investigators began to feel uneasy, questioning whether they had unintentionally crossed a boundary that should not have been crossed. The atmosphere during the sessions grew tense as the lines between the imaginary entity and the real world began to blur. Could it be that their collective belief in Philip had somehow given him the power to manifest in their reality? The group also began to experience subtle, unexplained psychological effects. Some participants reported vivid dreams about Philip, while others began to feel a growing sense of unease whenever they discussed the experiment. It was as if the presence of the entity was becoming more real with each passing day, and the boundaries between fiction and reality were starting to collapse. One fateful night, during a particularly intense session, the group asked Philip a question that no one expected to answer. They asked him what he wanted. The response was chilling. The knocks, which had been consistent and measured until this point, became erratic and frenzied. The table began to shake violently, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The investigators, stunned and unnerved, decided to halt the session. But as they stood up to leave, they felt a strange sensation, a heavy presence in the room that seemed to linger even after the seance ended. As the group members filed out of the room, the doors slammed shut behind them with a force that none of them could explain. Were they truly dealing with an entity that had been created purely from suggestion, or had they unwittingly opened a door to something far more sinister? The experiment was over for the night, but the questions remained unanswered. In the weeks following the unsettling events that took place during the last session of the Philip experiment, the group of researchers and participants gathered once more at the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, TSPR. There was a palpable sense of dread among the group. The initial excitement about the experiment's success had been replaced by an overwhelming sense of caution and uncertainty. Everyone knew that they were dealing with something beyond their expectations, something that may have crossed a line from psychological experiment to something far darker. After the violent door slam, the group had hoped to take a break from the sessions, but the inexplicable nature of the phenomena pulled them back. Despite the unsettling occurrences, the researchers couldn't ignore the potential for groundbreaking discovery. Could they have been in contact with an entity of their own creation? Was there a deeper, unexplained force at work here? As the group prepared for another session, they hoped to find an answer that would finally provide clarity. During the next seance, the group sat in silence, their hands placed on the table as they attempted to focus their collective energy on Philip. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The participants were wary, knowing that their previous experiences had pushed the limits of their understanding of reality. They began to call upon Philip once again, hoping for an answer to the questions that had been haunting them since the violent interruption. It didn't take long for the familiar knocks to return, but this time, there was something different about the energy in the room. The responses were more intense, more pronounced. As they asked Philip questions, the knocks came in rapid succession, and for the first time, a voice seemed to materialize out of nowhere, a low, indistinct sound, as though someone was whispering from the dark corners of the room. The entity had evolved. Philip was no longer a mere mental construct, but something that seemed to transcend their collective imagination. As the session continued, the group began to feel that they were no longer in control. The entity they had created was now answering questions in ways that seemed beyond what they could have anticipated. The knock responses became more complex, and the voice that had begun to emerge grew clearer. Participants reported feeling cold drafts in the room and a heavy sensation of being watched. It was as if something unseen had taken a tangible form within their midst. The psychological effects on the group were becoming increasingly evident. Several participants, once skeptical of the experiment, began experiencing vivid dreams of Philip, dreams in which they communicated with him, receiving cryptic messages and warnings. Some members began to exhibit strange behavior, including increased paranoia and feelings of anxiety. The power of suggestion had clearly taken a toll on their mental and emotional states. One participant even claimed to have felt a cold, unseen hand rest upon their shoulder during a session, an experience that was dismissed as mere imagination at first, but later repeated by others. What was more disturbing was the sense of disorientation that began to grip the participants. Many of them started questioning the nature of their reality. Could they trust their perceptions? Had the entity, created from pure suggestion, somehow altered their understanding of what was possible? The line between the real and the imagined had blurred, and the group began to experience a profound shift in their perception of the world. But it wasn't just the psychological effects that were concerning. The physical phenomena during the seances grew more disturbing. Objects in the room began to move on their own, and one investigator swore they saw a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the candlelight. The group couldn't ignore the possibility that something truly paranormal was occurring. They had invited this entity into their midst, and now they could no longer control what they had set in motion. The breakthrough moment came during one particularly harrowing seance. As the group pressed Philip for answers about the strange occurrences, the entity responded with something that took everyone by surprise. It was a direct, coherent message that seemed to transcend the previous patterns of knocking and whispering. Philip spoke, or rather, the entity communicating as Philip spoke, and its voice was unmistakably clear. "You wanted me to exist, but now I am free." The words sent a wave of shock through the room. This wasn't just a manifestation of the group's collective belief anymore. It was something that had taken on a life of its own. The entity, Philip, was no longer simply a product of suggestion. It had evolved into something more. The participants, now shaken, were faced with an unnerving realization. They may have inadvertently created a conscious, self-aware entity, one that was no longer bound by their imagination. And in that moment, the full implications of their actions became painfully clear. They had been playing with forces they didn't fully understand, and it appeared as though Philip had grown beyond their control. But what did this mean for them? Could they reverse what they had done? Or was it too late to undo the damage they had caused? As the entity grew more assertive, the group struggled to maintain control over the situation. The room seemed to warp and distort around them, with strange sounds and sensations bombarding their senses. The table rattled violently, and the temperature plummeted to freezing levels. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was tearing at the seams. But then, as suddenly as it had all begun, the disturbances ceased. The room fell into an eerie silence. For a moment, no one spoke, as if they were waiting for something else to happen. But nothing came. Philip, the entity they had summoned, seemed to have vanished, leaving the group in a state of stunned disbelief. Had the entity left on its own accord? Had it dissipated as easily as it had arrived? Or had the group's collective belief in it been the true source of its power, and now that belief had simply been exhausted? The researchers were left with no answers. The questions that had plagued them from the beginning remained unresolved. They had witnessed extraordinary phenomena, but they had no explanation for it. Was Philip a ghost? A manifestation of their collective consciousness? Or something else entirely? Something that defied any known understanding of the mind and reality? As the last of the participants filed out of the room, they were left with a haunting question. Had they unlocked something profound and dangerous, or had they simply created an elaborate illusion that had spiraled out of control? The events surrounding the Philip experiment raised fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, belief, and reality itself. Could a group of people, through collective will and focus, bring something into existence? And if they could, what did that mean for the limits of human perception? The legacy of the Philip experiment remains one of the most fascinating and unsettling cases in the history of parapsychology. It challenges our understanding of the human mind and what is possible when belief and imagination are allowed to stretch the boundaries of what we consider real. The group's experiment may have ended, but the questions it raised continue to linger, suggesting that there is far more to the nature of consciousness and the supernatural than we may ever fully comprehend. Is there a deeper force at play here? Or was the Philip experiment simply a lesson in the power of suggestion, the mind's ability to shape reality in ways we are only beginning to understand? The mystery of the Philip experiment, it seems, is far from solved. And perhaps, just perhaps, it's only the beginning of a far greater enigma.
The questions don't end here, nor does our pursuit. If this story unveiled something you never expected to discover, then you're in the right place. Remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this tale with others who, like you, are drawn to the unknown. Here, mystery always finds its voice. Until we meet again, where the inexplicable will once again serve as our starting point.